So I saw a picture circulating on social media a couple of weeks ago, and it really bothered me. It bothered me partially because it was so utterly mundane and boring. And I want to describe it for you. It's a picture of about a half dozen people. They're in a classroom, there's a chalkboard, and there's a professor writing on the chalkboard. Boring. But when you start realizing who's in it, it starts taking on new significance. The classroom is in Harvard. The professor is an evolutionary theorist named Nowak. The scribbles on the board are about how population masses change, how they accept change, and how they resist change. And two of the half dozen individuals sitting in the room are names that have become really familiar to us. They're with their notepads of paper and their pens in hand are Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon. And it struck me that the banality of this image somehow makes it worse. They're studying, trying to learn how to change large groups of people. These are already folks who have so much control, and they're trying to learn how to have more control. And I think sometimes that's just how scheming works. You know, I love superhero comics, and I wish that all of our fiendishly minded folks who have intentions to garner more and more control, I wish they wore iron masks and green robes like Dr. Doom. You know, or they put on Green Goblin costumes and flew around on gliders. I wish that they looked like Sauron from the Lord of the Rings movies and stood 30 feet tall with giant, ridiculous helmets and rings of power. But they're often just normal folks sitting in conference rooms or classrooms, learning, studying, deciding how to have greater control over the rest of us. We've been going through the book of John, and today we're on the seventh and last sign that our writer says are the seven wonders of Jesus, the miracles that point to who Jesus is supposed to be according to our writer's understanding. And the way these work, every sign, or at least most of the signs, they are pointing to these greater truths, these teachings that Jesus is sharing. You know, every sign is more than a miracle. Literally, they're an object lesson. And every teaching is an illumination of what this sign means. So this particular sign, it's a doozy. It's a big one. But it starts off with Jesus and his disciples sitting together, as they often do, and they receive a message. One of their close friends, Lazarus, has become gravely ill. And Jesus decides, well, okay, I'm going to stick around for a couple of days. And so they do. They sit together for a couple of days, and then they head out. And Jesus says to the disciples, all right, guys, we got to go. Our dear friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. And the disciples say, well, if he's sleeping, and he's sick. We should probably leave the guy be. And Jesus is like, by sleep, I mean he's dead. He's dead. Sorry. Now, as a reader, I appreciate all of the metaphorical language that Jesus just laces all throughout this book, because it's interesting, it's thought-provoking. He's constantly challenging us to see the world in a deeper way. But if I was one of these disciples, I think I would find this kind of thing insufferable after a while. You know, like if somebody's died, just say they died. Not everything has to be like this deeper metaphorical image, right? Sometimes we could just say, oh, our dear friend Lazarus, he's died. He's dead. So they hit the road, they go over, it's a long journey, and when they get to Lazarus's house, it's a couple of miles away from Jerusalem. And Lazarus has shared this house, this estate, with his sisters Martha and Mary. And when Martha sees Jesus, she says, you know, if you were here, you could have saved my brother. And Jesus says, well, look, he's going to rise again. She goes, yeah, I know. Because, you know, there's going to be this resurrection of everybody. You know, there's going to be this great apocalypse and then the beginning of a new world. And he's going to rise then. And Jesus is like, well, I'm the resurrection and the life. This is what I mean. Like every illustration, every sign has some sort of teaching attached. And this one has, well, I carry God with me. I carry the divine name with me. The God who creates all things is with me. And so I am also resurrection, and I'm life. And I find this interesting. At first, it seems like, is he being repetitious here? And maybe he could be. Sometimes he plays with parallelism. He's going to say an idea and then another idea that rhymes with the previous idea. But the earliest generations of Christians believed that faith was not, strictly speaking, an intellectual exercise, but a way you lived your life. And I think at the heart here, Jesus is saying, I'm not just about life beyond this one. I'm about life now. Good life now. Thriving, abundant life now. The Ionios life, a life so full it overflows from this one into whatever world to come there is. And then he says, can you go get your sister for me? So Martha goes back and she says, hey, Mary, Jesus wants you. And she comes on out, and there's a big crowd of neighbors there. One of the pains of small-town life, if you've ever been lucky enough to experience it, is everybody knows your business. And also one of the blessings of small-town life is everyone knows your business. I have so many conversations with people who are carrying so much suffering by themselves. I wish everybody had a community kind of like Mary and Martha get here. Because they're surrounded by an entourage of neighbors who are just there to comfort them, to grieve with them. So Mary comes out to Jesus, and she kneels down on the ground before him. Mary in this gospel is often a lot more emotive than Martha. And she says the same thing. You know, if you were here earlier, you could have saved my brother. And then she weeps. What an incredible image this is of the sister kneeling on the ground, crying, weeping. And the crowd of comforters, they start weeping. You ever have one of those moments where grief is just contagious, where you're trying to keep it together and then somebody starts crying, you're like, oh no, oh, it's happening to me now. Now I'm going to start crying, right? This feels like one of those, you know? And Jesus asks her, where the body is. And she says, come and see. Come and see is usually something in this book that Jesus says to other people. It's a teaching comment. I'm inviting you to learn from me. But we have a reversal this time. She, Mary, is saying it to Jesus. And I wonder what our writer means by this. It means more than just, I want you to see the tomb. I wonder if there is this core of teaching that she's doing of the human experience, because Jesus is this unique person who carries divinity with him. Whatever the case may be, he starts weeping. This is what produces the shortest, the famously shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. It's provoked by this. It's provoked not just by Lazarus' death, but by the grief of Martha and Mary and this crowd of neighbors, and then Mary saying, come and see. And then the waterworks start. Throughout this book, Jesus is trying to communicate that the kind of things you see me do, well, those are the kinds of things that God cares about. The kind of life I'm talking about, well, that's the kind of stuff that God wants you to care about. And I think in this moment, we are getting a picture into the heart of God. We often think of God as this great immutable force, but to the Jesus that we see in the book of John, Jesus is showing us that God cares, that God carries the suffering too, that God carries our pain, shares our pain with us, even in those moments that feel so lonely, so guttingly horrible. So Jesus follows Mary and the crowd. They go to the tomb, and Jesus says, all right, well, roll the stone back, because this is a cave tomb. I wish that was more of a thing over here, Anybody can have like a graveyard plot, but like a tomb that's in a cave, like that just sounds cool. And Jesus says, like, all right, roll back the stone. And Martha very pragmatically says, listen, my brother's been dead for 4 days now. That's going to smell. It's going to smell really bad. But Jesus says, look, I've told you before that if you believe me, and you'll see the glory of God, which sounds like very, very, very layered. But when I read this, I picture the movie Aladdin in my mind. I picture that scene in the movie Aladdin where Aladdin is standing on the magic carpet and he reaches his hand out to Princess Jasmine and he says, trust me, right? I'm going to show you this whole new world. I think that's what Jesus is saying here. Trust me. And so they roll the stone back. And Jesus gives a prayer. It's for everybody else's benefit. It's a very performative prayer. He's like, I'm praying to you, God, out loud, not because I need to, but because everybody else needs to see I'm doing this, all right? And then he says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus comes out. Lazarus, who's been dead for 4 days. Lazarus, who's been stinking up this tomb, comes out. And it is quite a sight, because he's all wrapped up in his burial clothes. His arms and his legs are all bound together. He still has burial cloth wrapped around his face. This is like something out of an old-timey mummy movie. Right. But I think it leans more Abbott and Costello because of how bounded he is. He has to like kind of hobble and hop out. And then Jesus says, all right, well, unwrap the poor guy. And they do. What a scene. a lot of the crowd are like, you know what? I'm gonna listen to what this guy has to say. And that is what provokes the passage we read a moment ago. Instead of these religious leaders centered in Jerusalem being excited that here is someone who can bring the dead back to life, someone who can heal others, we've got somebody we're losing control to. What if other people listen to this guy and continue to follow him? What are we, as the religious and political civic leaders, going to do? If we lose control of this situation, I'm worried Rome's going to come in and destroy us. And there's a rich irony here, because this book is written a good deal of time after Jerusalem and the temple are destroyed. And our writer knows that, and the initial readers that he's writing to, they would know that as well. And we see this in our own day in life. Y'all have to let me and my elite pals run everything. You have to let us run everything. Because if we're not in charge, everything is going to fall apart. And here in this casual conference meeting of Pharisees and Sadducees, they reach this decision. We have to kill this man. We have to kill him. In the other Gospels, it's the cleansing of the temple that leads to Jesus' murder. You know, it's this big public protest act. In this Gospel, it's Jesus bringing someone back to life. What could be better than that? I can't think of a good act better than bringing someone back to life. Who's truly threatened by this? Only those who need to assert control over others and fear this force of life. And so they make this decision in this conference meeting. It is better for one man to die than everyone else. This is a necessary sacrifice. One of the things that have struck me over the last few months is how often powerful people in our world seek out innocence as necessary sacrifices for their schemes and their plans. I get this sense, there's a trope in mob movies where you've got like one mobster and he's like, hey, listen, I'm gonna do this horribly evil thing, but it's nothing personal. It's just business. And that's been true by schemers and leaders seeking to assert control for millennia. Hey, it's nothing personal. It's just business that we gotta murder Jesus. It's nothing personal, it's just business that we have to identify this group of people as our enemies and destroy them. And this teaching, like the teachings that Jesus pairs with this act, they're all around living the life that God desires. A spiritual life, a deeper life, a life that goes beyond the artifice of what we see to the things that are more significant. Jesus is teaching that this is the good and fulfilling life. Who is threatened by that? Now, I used to think that it's cartoonish to think that Jesus was murdered for teaching a good life, Because what kind of threat is that really? But if we look at our leaders who feel threatened by folks living good lives today, this starts making more sense to me. This feels more significant to me. What threats do transgender people in Kansas pose? None. And yet thousands of them are having their driver's licenses revoked there. What kind of threat are immigrants in our country posing to everyone else? Statistically, much less of a threat than citizens who are native born. What kind of threats is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to our society? None. And yet, our partners are being threatened to lose their funding, right? What kind of threat is affordable housing? What kind of threat is healthcare? What kind of threat is public schooling? What kind of threat is livable wages? Our society is and has always been imperfect, but we were making positive advancements. We were having important conversations resulting in greater multiculturalism and mutual thriving as barriers to peace and justice and freedom and needs were beginning to be addressed. All these forces of new life, all these forces stretching our imaginations and reshaping our world for the better, but also loosening the grip that the most powerful have over us, threatening to limit their self-interest and their money and their power. And so now we see this concerted effort against all these things that bring new life. So what do we do about it? Well, I think we ask ourselves who we seek to support in this time and place. Do we align ourselves with selfish people who sacrifice innocence for their power? Or do we align ourselves with God, with the God we see in this story? The God Jesus shows us, who cares for us and weeps with us and desires and leads to abundant life. Do we embrace the work of evil schemers, or do we join in the work of resurrection? I choose resurrection. I choose life. I choose to follow the God of love and life, and I reject these leaders who claim Jesus and would still seek to murder him today. I choose a society that loves and affirms all people and that wants to see all people thrive. May we continue to show up for this work together. May we experience a taste of such a society today and not passively wait for it to come.